Manish, you just now mentioned roasting in one of the steps. So roasting would mean that there will be loss of moisture, right?
Yeah,
So that would mean loss of weight. So how much of weight is lost?
I think the roasting is yes, it's loss of moisture and loss of weight, but I think that would be about, usually you lose about 20% of the
20%.
weight. Yeah, so 100 whatever
Yeah,
kilos of green bean would be about 80 odd kilos
80
of
of
roasted bean. But
roasted.
I think the more important step, the reason why roasting is important, because it is not just a means of conversion to make it a consumable product, but I think the roasting process really is one of the key drivers for development of the coffee aroma.
Sure, sure.
Because,
Absolutely.
yeah,
No, I get that. No, no. One of the reasons why I asked this question is I think later when we discuss prices, I want people to understand that, that when Manish buys 100 kg of green coffee and then, he or his customer roasts it, they are left with only 80 kg, right?
yeah, yeah,
So, which means they have lost certain amount of the money that they paid to the fire god. So
yeah.
which means it's the people's default assumption that intermediary makes more money, like 20% jada paisa le le, has charged
Right.
20% more or whatever. That there are steps in the process that you described where various things happen and it is not a straight connection between purchase price and your markup. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to leave that thought in people's mind that when you buy 100 kg after roasting, the buyer has only 80 kg of coffee left to sell, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
So that's where it fitted in. But before we go into the prices, which should come up pretty soon, you know in India people blend coffee with a thing called chicory. So is that done in other country, and what exactly is chicory's role in Indian coffee?
So yes, it is. I mean, it is done in some of the other countries. I think in South America, which is where chicory originates. I think, and also in one or two countries in Europe. But predominantly, I think on scale, the usage of chicory is more in India, and I think the drivers of that are a few. So one, of course, is cost, because it is much cheaper than coffee, and therefore it kind of helps bring down the price of the coffee. The
Mm,
second, I think, is the body,
mm,
because chicory on its own, if you have tried chicory, it's very bitter
mm,
and very thick, viscous kind of a liquid.
mm,
So when you blend that with coffee, it provides a certain strength and a bit of the body to the coffee. So it, and from people who are drinking, let's say, espresso, or maybe even the Indian filter coffee method, the crema that you see on the top, when you the foam or the froth that gets generated when you do a coffee cup,
right.
it gets enhanced because there is more of that in chicory than
Chicory.
in proper coffee. If you do full coffee, you will never have that foam or the froth being there for a long time. It
Okay.
dissipates very fast, but
That's
people like it,
interesting.
when you do
That's
that, and it,
interesting.
it stays there for a while. So
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
crema is also why chicory is used.
That's
So
interesting. So earlier you mentioned that Robusta adds body and bitterness to coffee. Now chicory takes it to the next level.
yeah. Yeah, yes, yes.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to the other point that I was just alluding to before this point we talked about is what are the major factors that influence price in this industry?
It's a mix of multiple factors, like in any
Yeah.
commodity. And
Right.
I think with the advent of technology and information ubiquity,
Hmm.
it's becoming market which has just so many moving parts. So some of the key factors. One, of course, is
The
supply
2 year
and demand.
cycle. The
Yeah,
2 year
2 years,
cycle.
the 2 year cycle, and overall supply and demand within that cycle. Because, like I said, when we talk of crop balance sheets,
Hmm.
normally, obviously, you will talk on a larger, broader scale, one coffee balance sheet. But like
Hmm.
I told you, the way trade looks at it, you will say the natural balance sheet, the washed balance sheet, and the robusta balance sheet. Yeah, and therefore each of these three balance sheets will have some interaction, because there is a bit of uh, uh, substitutability between these. So
Mm.
if there is a problem in washed Arabica, if Colombia is having a problem, some of the users, if they are forced to, will obviously first choice would be to move to other washed suppliers, so a
Right.
Honduras, a Guatemala, or whatever.
Right.
But if they can't do it and there's not enough, then they try and use a little bit more of Brazil in that blend to kind of compensate and make sure they still are not able to, or not tweaking the blend too much. So
Mm.
so it's basically the balance sheet or supply and demand, which is the primary thing. But then of course, like I mentioned, I today the issues around the non-commercial participation, so funds participation in the markets, which can be a big mover.
Mm-hmm.
The overall investment climate, the various macroeconomic issues around currency, because that determines a large extent what prices local producers get for their product,
Mm-hmm.
and interest rates, freight rates. So it's a mix of a lot of things, but with, I would say, the supply demand and the non-commercial participation and the uh, interplay between the sub coffee balance sheets, I think, which is probably a large driver of coffee prices.
Okay. So, so apart from the cyclical nature, give the being a agricultural crop, it also gets affected by insects, viruses, etc. Right. So, which
Yeah.
are the ones which affect it, and is there a pattern to those things?
So yeah. So like any crop, I think weather is one part of it, but pest and disease is the other part. Somewhere they are correlated as well, because if temperatures are high, you tend to get more of
More
some
insect.
insects.
Right.
So, but in coffee, Arabica, like I said, is more susceptible. So it probably you hear more of that. So some of the uh, uh, pest and diseases that you kind of see or hear more, or which are more impact on coffee,
Mm.
would be Arabica coffee has the issue of leaf rust, right? So,
Right.
in fact, it was in the news, let's say 8, 10 years ago, in a big way, slightly
Right.
more. I think in 2008, 2009,
Mm.
Colombia and most of the countries in South Central America had the issue around coffee leaf rust, which is basically a fungal disease, and
Right.
it impacts leaf drop, and therefore the ability of the plant to generate or produce fruit.
Mm.
And it's a disease that is doesn't kill the plant really, but it takes a lot of time and effort to revive it back to good productivity, so you lose big time productivity. And
Okay.
Colombia, from being the third largest coffee producer, actually had a drop of over 50%
Wow.
of their crop, and the government then embarked on a big program of replanting with better varieties that were leaf rust tolerant or resistant.
Right.
So leaf rust would be one of the key ones, but then others would be the stem borer, the coffee berry borer, which kind of is when you see a coffee bean, some of them will have small holes, and
Mm-hmm.
that's because this berry borer has eaten through it when the coffee was a fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the leaf miners. So there are quite a few, but I would say leaf rust, the borers, leaf miners, these would be some of the important pest and disease issues.
Right. So, as we move the discussion forward in the next segment, let's discuss how the industry has changed since you started out way back. So, Manish, what have been the major events in the history of coffee business over the last few decades? Which you would
Yeah.
prefer to highlight? Maybe top four, top five.
So, in my opinion, I would rather look at this as either events, because in coffee, events are usually related to a frost in Brazil,
Yeah.
or more weather related events.
Right.
And then I would probably also want to look at some inflection points which have kind of shaped the trade and the consumption of coffee to where we are today. So from
I had both in mind, so we
yeah,
are on the same page. Yeah.
so I would say the first for me would be the breakdown of the ICO price stabilization mechanism, or it was like a quota system that existed pre 80, I think late 80s. 80 it broke down in 89, but prior to that, for almost quite I think maybe 2 decades or more than that, we were basically working as a quota led trade, where each country, the ICO, which is the International Coffee Organization, had for each country, producing country, a quota going to which consuming country, and therefore it kind of made sure prices were stable, and every country had an opportunity to sell what it produced
Mm-hmm.
without getting into too much productive capacity or kind of cutting back production because it was not. So it was, and I think that agreement ended in late 80s in 89, I think, and I think that is when really for the first time, so 30 years ago, where coffee was left to its own economics, where it was left to producers to decide how much they would want to grow and find their own markets, and also to basically determine the pecking order globally, that whoever was the most efficient kind of one. And I think that is how, if we see it is in these last 20, 30 years, while Brazil was always the base, but I think the the growth over these years has been dominated by the most efficient producers, whether it was Brazil, it was Vietnam, maybe to some extent Honduras, some of, maybe a bit of Uganda. So these are the ones, the producers that have moved. So for me, that was one inflection point. The second, I think, obviously, I talked about frost. So, that has always been a big issue for coffee, because if the largest producer and the largest by far has this issue around the frost because of the where they grow coffee, and those areas are susceptible to frost, then, obviously, we've not seen a frost for a long time, but the last severe frost was in 99, and a very severe one in 94. 2000 we had a mild frost, but after that, really for the last 20 years, we've not had any significant frost event. Yes, minor events, yes, but so climate change there has kind of been there, but frost was one thing that kind of has always been after us. The other third one I would say is the what we in coffee we call, coffee people love to call, especially in the new age coffee, they love to call the whole coffee consumption story in three waves. Now, of course, there are fourth and fifth, but I would stick to the original three wave theories, where first wave was more around people, when coffee became available to the masses in a easy consuming format. So it was the Maxwell House, those kind of people where they made coffee or Folgers
Mm-hmm.
available in the US, and that is the first wave. Obviously, these the waves refer primarily to the coffee movement in the US, because that has been the real innovator in coffee ever since. And the second wave, so that is what I was coming to. The second wave is where I think it was another good turning point for us, which was basically the move of out of home, led by the likes of Starbucks, and
Mm.
then by people like Pete's as well, where you had these mushrooming stores, people really getting into the habit of going across in the morning before office, picking up a coffee from a coffee shop, good coffee, but really the format changing into that. So that really was the second wave for us.
Sure.
Then, of course, moving into the third wave, which also has really is what we are probably in an extended version, which is what people call the fourth or the fifth, but it's really the third wave is the movement towards specialty coffee,
Right.
where origin, provenance and sustainability became in the focus. Direct trade, where you could buy coffee, knowing fully well where the coffee came from, who the farmer was, what the variety was, what kind of conditions it was grown in, and what all went in the coffee. And
Right.
I think the other last part would be what I would say as single serve, which is basically again a movement that started quite early, but it gained trend in the last 15 odd years, where
Pods.
Nespresso, Green Mountain, Keurig, which is now Keurig Dr Peppers, these were the leaders who kind of moved in, and it kind of changed the consumption format for coffee, for high quality coffee at home. So
Right.
basically trying to give you a second wave and a third wave experience at in the comfort of your house. So these are some of the trends I think that have been important for us.
That's very well put, and I think we will revisit them later in the discussion. But I wanted to sort of explore a little more about mm, Vietnam, which where you have been, you've spent early part of your career. You talked about that, people in the past didn't, wouldn't think of like Vietnam as a major player in the coffee business. So it was not a major producer at all, and started growing coffee commercially probably in the mid 90s. Is that correct? Right. So what exactly happened? Yeah, I think you said it's probably around 20% of the market. So what led to this transformation that it has become a major producer, major exporter, and that too it's a tea drinking country
Yeah.
traditionally.
So I think it's a classic case study of an origin and a country that wanted to um, improve the livelihoods of people and producers. And in the Central Highlands, I think it was a mix of uh, government support initially,
Mhm,
because the government went about it trying to put across a framework
mhm,
to be a large coffee producer. So it was very clear that they had a vision. So they put out all the small constituents of building up a coffee business. So they started with having a few large state-owned farms,
mhm,
which would be the fulcrum where you could probably do outdoor programs, training for farmers to do, because they never seen a coffee plant, right? And it came from outside. So they brought in good varieties. They created a few research stations uh, where they would research on good varieties, on better practices of farming, on good husbandry. Uh, they also created an infrastructure in terms of engineering infrastructure to create a few state-owned companies or entities that were involved in manufacturing coffee machines.
mhm,
And their
mhm.
whole idea was to, get machines from some of the other developed producers like Brazil
Mhm.
and reverse engineer them, of saying, look, how do we make a grader? How do we make a, destoner? And, you just reverse engineer that. And I think
Right.
with that, and with a lot of the work around it, that was really the first impetus. But I think a large part of that success story should has to go to the producers of Vietnam, because of their sheer entrepreneurial spirit, wanting to go out there and really improve life for themselves without relying entirely on the government to help. Yes, government help is there, and I think once that initial, I would say when I moved to Vietnam in early part of 2000, 20 years ago, Vietnam was a 400,000 ton producer. Yeah, today we are probably closer to just under 2 million tons. Yeah, and you could see that farmers there were interested. They wanted to know, they wanted to learn, they wanted to experiment. They would see my neighbor has coffee, he's done well, and therefore I can do it as well. And you kind of, it is that shared spirit of enterprise which I think is has been the main reason for them to be up here, and with good support infrastructure and a framework from the government to manage it. And therefore, like I said, right up, even up to exporters, even today, there are many companies in the Vietnamese coffee exporting ecosystem that are state-owned. So right from owning farms to ancillary support services to R&D to machinery manufacturing to exporter who is the final buyer, the whole chain was supported by the state to make sure they have enough participation to make an impact. And once it became big enough, now there is no need for that. There is enough private enterprise that has come in there.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was a good
They
mix of
allowed that also. They allowed
yes,
private enterprise. Okay. Okay. So we looked at the supply chain, for or value chain for in the coffee. So what have been the sort of like the major shifts or developments in the production side, processing side, industry consolidation, etc. I know some of it you have mentioned, but maybe in this question you could take a
yeah.
deep
I'll
dive.
just revisit that. So uh, among the ships, one would be, of course, which I mentioned earlier, was the consolidation of producers. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, Brazil and Vietnam, and to some extent Honduras and Uganda, but primarily a large chunk of the growth that we've had in terms of production has been coming from Brazil and Vietnam. So today,
Okay. Yep.
that's
Yep.
one. In terms of industry consolidation, also yes, that in the last few years there has been a fair bit of consolidation where uh, there's been people using the opportunity to acquire different companies. So we see the JAB umbrella, which is JD, Keurig, Dr. Peppers, Pete's, a
Mm.
lot of companies coming under a common umbrella. So that's become a fairly large group today. Nestle, of course, has also been active, looking at expanding their business and also getting on some of the specialty players like Blue Bottle is now part of Nestle. So there has been a lot of activity, M&A activity going over the last few years, and that has made these large pockets of buyers, which have a huge spread and access to customers and different formats. The other would be the rise of certified and sustainable coffee. So that I think has been growing over the last few years, and it today is there on the menu of every doorstep, whether it is certifications in coffee which are popular, or are the Rainforest Alliance, which is the green frog that we some of us would recognize in the shelf.
Mm,
The UTZ, which is UTZ, which is more a Dutch-led certification, but very popular.
mm,
Fair trade, of course, is more active in pockets in certain countries. The 4C and also other uh, buyer specific, because also what has happened is, when you go out there, some companies felt that it is difficult for the consumer at the retail level to understand what is a rainforest or what is a oots, and therefore they wanted it is a better option to move into their own certification, so they can do a lot of communication with their eventual customer on what all they do to
mhm,
get the coffee from farm to cup.
mhm,
But it is under their own certification program. So Starbucks has their own program, which is called CAFE, CAFE, which is Coffee and Farmers Equity,
mm,
and they have their own list of guidelines of how to get certified for cafe, and it's a mandate that anybody who supplies coffees to them would have to be cafe certified. Similarly, Nespresso has their own Nespresso AAA program, which is again a different program. So I think the rise of certified and sustainable coffees has been exceptional in the last 2 decades. The other part would be the impact. I think right now, with the last year or so living with COVID, I think we have seen a bit of a setback for the specialty and the small nano roaster market, the
mhm,
homegrown roaster market,
mhm,
because these guys were really the exciting part of the specialty business in the US, getting out new coffees, unique stuff, but on small volume, small scale. And I think this whole lockdown and the lack of access to customer and market, I
mm,
think has hit them hard. So it will take some time. I was reading some news today also on one of the newsletters that in the US, which is really the hotbed of specialty coffee,
coffee, yeah.
uh, they expect that it will be back to normal only by 2023,
Okay.
and maybe 65% back to normal by the end of 2021. So,
Mhm,
so
mhm,
that's one part that was really leading some of that growth. We hope it will come back soon. The last part I think is, I would see that coffee has been so far, we have seen now for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, fairly recession proof. And we
mm,
have seen it have a almost standard growth between 1.5% and 2.5% per annum over these years.
mm,
And I think that has been in part been led by the level of innovation or the spate of innovations in the consumption format and the product format that
okay.
continues to happen in coffee. And I
Right.
think that is continues to pick up. So that's how I would put the overall way the current industry is positioned.
Right. Right. Um, Anything unique about the from the supply chain perspective? Anything that happened? I know the things that you talked about do have a supply chain, you know, relevance, but just in case, because in some cases, bulk handling, technology, blockchain, whatever, some things have technological advancements have started making a difference. But you looked at it from the other side, so just wanted to know before we move on to discuss the consumer side of it.
So I think in terms of the supply chain and the technology in supply chain, I think the blockchain is something that obviously people have talked about and are talking about, but so far it has not really seen big application in the origin side of things
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
yet. uh, where we do see some improvement or some the advent of digital
mm-hmm,
into mainstream supply chain procurement is more around trying to see how we can enable technology to manage, create, and administer farmer groups, or small groups of farmers where you have either quality as a differentiator or a
Mm.
certification as a differentiator,
Mhm.
and also to enable that process by allowing direct transactional access with that farmer, or maybe a group of farmers with the eventual exporter. And
Right.
I know that some of the companies, including us, are doing a lot of work around creating that digital platform of being able to both try in some cases and disintermediate and therefore reach the producer directly, but also to, in other cases, try and use technology to help the intermediary be a lot more efficient and therefore be able to provide and access a larger group or set of suppliers than he currently is able to do that. So
Right.
I would say, in that sense, coffee is a traditional business, and therefore in processing, while there's small changes that keep happening, they are more incremental. I don't see any at the buying side, barring this move towards digital enabled procurement. I think in the processing side, it's still
Still going to be the
pretty
same.
much same. Yeah.
Right, right. So that brings us to the interesting side, which you have mentioned a couple of times on the consumer side, right?
Yeah.
Technological advancements, and dispensing how people can consume it, and how they can consume higher grade, higher flavor,
Yeah.
coffee in pods and so on. So just quick question, before you sort of probably want to add to what you have said.
Yeah.
We also noticed that China and India, which have been, more tea drinking countries. I mean, India does have some tradition of coffee drinking, but China has taken on to coffee drinking and so on and so forth. So do you see some market impact with these things? Because some of
Yeah.
the technological thing that we are talking about often refers to the developed countries. So I just wanted to make sure that like we cover these countries, emerging economies coming up and
Yeah.
beyond.
No, I think the both China and India, of course, started off as are predominantly tea drinking countries. But I
Mm.
think the culture of drinking coffee is improving.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the normal trend when consumers move from tea to
Mm.
coffee
Mm.
is that they move first to soluble coffee,
Right.
because it is very,
Instant.
it's the same level of convenience or whatever, and then to graduating as they appreciate coffee better and quality better, then they start graduating to the R&D segment.
Mm.
And I think it's not different to what's happening here.
Mm.
Uh, but China is also seeing good growth so in the RNG and specialty now. Of course, on a small base, so it's not really at a level yet that is moving the market, but it is increasingly becoming more and more important for everybody. And earlier, we saw in the phase of that move from tea to soluble or instant coffee, companies, large global soluble companies moving their Nestle, Kraft, moving their factories there, and that has worked well.
Mm.
But now you also see a lot of the out of home demand. The Starbucks, their local homegrown
Coffee chains. Yeah.
companies like Luckin and all these. So
Yeah.
it's basically a very moving market. India is also growing, I would say, at a smaller pace and at a smaller base than China. But it is also on that trend. And
Mm.
once we are done, or once in the new post-COVID normal, and the food service and the out-of-home thing picks up again, I see India also continuing to move in that growth phase. So answering your other question on the consumer end changes, I think I mentioned that already. But just to refresh that, so some of the in the on the supply on the consumer end, it's basically been more around good quality and a different experience, or a novelty value, as well as convenience continuing to be redefined. So on the convenience side, premixes, good quality single serves, the experience of having a good cup of coffee at home is what is driving that single serve market. And therefore, single serve is good quality coffee, but available in an easier format. Uh, then cold brew is another area that has kind of been working quite well in select markets, and that is something to watch out for. That going forward, cold brew, which is basically RTD kind of a format for coffee, is working well in the US, and also we are seeing some good signs in other markets.
Sure.
The other area would be, coffee fruit or cascara, is as it called, base drink. So that's again something that is very niche, very small, and that's slowly picking up, but looks
Interesting.
promising. Yes.
Right. 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 So so there's a lot of activity, a lot of action taking place on the consumer end, and we should look at the market, right? So
Yeah.
keep an eye on the market. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So your life is never boring, right? So viewers, listeners, join us back for the next part of the discussion with Manish, where we talk about uncertainty and risk management in the coffee business. How does he manage it, right? So we'll join you in the next part of this discussion.